Did it tell you recording in progress?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. You good?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, just drink a little water.
Me.
Yep. Just had some Japanese cookies or some shit.
Fuck that shit.
Golly,
Fuck
cookie.
you for eating them. All right, here we go. Welcome to the Too Long Didn't Read Book Club. I am your host, Brandon Richardson, joined by Jeff, the main man. Yeah. So if you aren't familiar with our show, because it's the first episode of this one officially ever, I host another podcast called All Damn Night, and we wanted to kind of like branch off and do some different stuff. So usually I'm like All Damn Night's a music history podcast, and to do that, I end up reading a lot of audiobooks, but then I read a lot of audiobooks that don't have anything to do with music history. So I thought, like, how can we incorporate some of these into shamelessly exploiting any kind of talents we might have been gifted with? And I thought the Too Long Didn't Read Book Club. And if you're not familiar, like Too Long Didn't Read is a Reddit thing. If you're like a boomer joining us somehow, don't know what Too Long Didn't Read is.
I don't know. Well, I'm not an avid reader myself.
Yeah, right.
I tell people I read and then talk to people like you to tell me what was in the book.
Now I'm going to get a lot of flack because a lot of stuff that I quote unquote read is audible books or audio books. So they're not yet a sponsor. I think they should be, but if people will say, oh, well, it doesn't count as reading because you don't have the book in front of you. And it's like, yeah, well, fuck you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what it's kind of like lands on that side of the coin. So anyways, on that passive aggressive note, we are gonna, what we do generally is kind of, we'll take a book that I think is kind of out of left field a lot of times, or something that maybe people haven't heard of. So like, you know, if you're looking for the cliff notes on The Catcher in the Rye or something, that's not exactly what we're doing. It's kind of giving you cool books that I think might not be well known, and enough to give you either an idea of what you'll be getting into if you go get the book yourself, or if you get caught at a party talking to somebody that has read the book, or you want to sound like you've read the book. We'll give you enough to do that. You know, like we'll give you enough to sound like you know what you're talking about.
They're very educated. Free education. That's what they want, right?
You're welcome. You're welcome, everyone. We've solved your we've solved your problem. I expect an email from AOC anytime soon. But so what we're going to be talking about tonight is actually a pretty, I mean, a controversial foot to start off on in a lot of respects, because it's a, I think, kind of often maligned and misunderstood, or at least like kind of falsely polarized part of history. And what we're going to talk about is the conquest of the Aztecs, the conquistador Hernan Cortez, in the book written by let me see, what is the name again? He writes a lot of these books. This is called Conquistador by Buddy Levy. Unless it's Levi, then I apologize, but I think it's Buddy Levy. It's Hernan Cortez, King Montezuma, and the last stand of the Aztecs.
Now, wait, what did you say was the controversy?
So this is one of those things where a lot, if you look this up on a lot of YouTube channels, if you look on a lot of like maybe mainstream educational outlets, they kind of portray Hernan Cortez as an out and out psychopath. And we're not here to say that that's not the case, right? I'm not going to come out and tell you that's not the case, but they try and make it this no pun intended, but like black and white issue where it's like, oh, Spanish bad, Aztecs good, and they just got overrun and conquered by this evil European empire. And it's like,
yeah,
no, that's not the case at all. The Aztecs were an evil empire in and of themselves, and Moctezuma was a psychopath. I mean, if Cortez might have been, Montezuma was, by all accounts, like by all modern measures, a full-on psychopath. Like they were essentially kind of farming people for human sacrifice.
yeah.
Like if you've ever seen Mel Gibson's movie Apocalypto, It's
Yeah.
largely based on that. Like there's a lot that's not actually that's not literally the Aztecs, but it's basically the Aztecs. Uh,
Okay. See, I thought that was the Aztecs in that. I mean, they
yeah, I don't
just
think it is
had a
literally. I could
person.
be wrong on that. I could be wrong on that. This is that's the nature of this podcast. We don't have to be exact on everything, but I don't know if his was literally the Aztecs, but I could damn sure be wrong on that.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, at the end, I believe Cortez was coming in.
yeah, so they saw the Spanish coming in, and Montezuma was this really suspicious guy, which and really superstitious guy, which meant, in short, that he sacrificed a whole lot of people. And so, what people kind of fail to recognize is this isn't this tale of like one bully coming in and messing with like the nice kid in class. These are two, like, Montezuma and Cortez are the two most like alpha Chad kind of
Yeah.
dickhead dudes that ever were. But this is an insane story. Like no matter how you break it down, it makes it it's like mixing Predator with Apocalypto with like I don't know, like The Hills Have Eyes and
Oh,
uh
so they were
Apocalypse
crazy,
Now.
crazy. So two crazy people leading some like communities, basically.
Yeah, and well, not it's funny that Cortez came in there. This is kind of like you got to look at Cortez like you would kind of like a modern day. Okay, so let's like kind of set the stage for how Cortez got to where he is, because before we start making analogies as to how you should think of him, at the beginning, right? It's 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and 30 years or so later, just under 30 years later, they had kind of conquered Cuba. Cortez was working for a guy who had taken over Cuba, and he was kind of like the local governor of it. And they decided, well, I'm not gonna like, in short, I'm not gonna like make my bones here because this guy's already kind of taken up all the goods. So I'm gonna go across the river, like across the channel, across the Gulf of Mexico to where they knew there was more land, and we'll see if there's basically gold there, or like it wasn't just gold, it was gold, land, uh resources. As far as like the slavery aspect went, there was like a kind of a weird thing going on with, there's this odd mix, especially with the Spanish at this time, of the Catholic Church's influence, and popes had already put out edicts saying that you can't just go take natives and make them slaves. Like you had to respect their property and stuff, and you had to
Oh,
like they had to be treated as like convertible, meaning like people that could be converted to the Christian faith. They had to be treated as such, and not
they
like
were.
they took anti-slavery stances
Oh, so they
pretty
were.
darn early on.
Church wasn't aiming to subjugate these people.
No, so that's a
And
secular motive. Yeah. So what they're doing, it becomes this like two things that are hard to differentiate, but they're not exactly the same. Like the church largely influenced and in many ways like kind of by proxy controlled the state, right? Like because basically at this time everyone who was Christian was a Catholic. There was no other church. It was just Catholicism. It's just the Catholic Church, basically. And so, if that's all there is, and your king and queen are Catholic, then they're going to kind of do what the Pope says, right? It's why, like, having JFK as a Catholic president was such a big deal in America, because it was like,
yeah,
oh, great, now the fucking Pope's going to run the country. But
I never thought of it like that.
yeah, oh yeah, that's what people thought. Like in the early '60s, they're like, oh shit, now we're gonna have like John the 23rd or something running the country. So I'm like, oh great. But so what a lot of this was just like, yeah, they kind of by proxy controlled it, but it wasn't really. There's this weird thing where these like the king and queen, obviously, like they're in it for their own good. Sometimes they'd rather like beg God's forgiveness than ask his permission in a lot of ways. They're just like,
Mhm.
oh, I'd rather go take these lands over and then like, ask you to forgive me than like sit here and wonder what could have been.
Yeah.
So like they're always kind of walking this line of like, I'm in it for conquest of my own money, but also like we're in it for the conversion of souls. And like if I happen to run across any souls and like that aren't in the fold of the church, then like we're gonna do our best to convert them. But then that's kind of where, okay, so all that said,
Mm-hmm.
Cortez takes all that and does it in the most alpha Chad, like it would be a study for any Green Beret officer or someone conducting unconventional warfare, where he just takes all of these resources, goes to Mexico, basically starts a couple skirmishes with the local tribes and just beats the shit out of them, just like mauls them. He's like, you don't have fucking horses, you don't have guns, you don't have swords, shut the fuck up. Like, I'll just fucking
Yeah.
mow you all down. And there's like, oh, whoa, this is crazy. Are you like a god? And he's like, I'm not a god. And they're like, oh shit. He's like, this is nuts. And he's like, yeah. And then he's like, well, who has like all the gold here? And they're like, oh, these sons of bitches, like the Aztecs, man, they keep coming over here and taking all our people. Like the Aztecs would just show up in their villages and demand like, give us 100 people, give us 50 boys and 50 girls, and we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice them because like the corn crop didn't
So
come in
good
this year.
rain.
Or they were just like, you made us mad, so give us like 50 girls or something for us to sacrifice. Or like they say that North America was built on slavery, and like I don't know that that's entirely wrong, but it misses pre-contact, like pre-European contact slavery. It's like, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like, yes, it largely was, and most a good chunk of that came before Europeans ever got here, and these vast slave networks, especially in Central America and South America, like the Aztecs were holding people. Like, so one guy that Cortez comes across is
Mm-hmm.
this guy named Geronimo de Aguilar, and so Cortez is going up this river, and all these boats of this tribe come at him, and he's like, "Oh shit, there's a lot of people." And they're like, "This is pretty tight. Like maybe we won't be able to make enough of a show of force." And this dude like stands up on the canoe, and he's like, "Hey, are you guys Christians?" And they're like, well, bro, what's up? They're like, why can you speak Spanish? Like, what is up with this? And like, it ends up, he was a monk who had gotten shipwrecked like got like 8 years earlier. And the Aztecs had caught him and then put him in a cage and slaughtered, like sacrificed everybody else in the group, like the other conquistadors and everything, like sacrificed him right in front of him, and then kept him in this cage, fattening him up once it's like for the next sacrifice. And once he figured out like, oh, they're fattening me up, like he was like, bail sesh, I'm out of here, and like
Yeah.
pried the bars open and ran out in the middle of the night. So Geronimo de Aguilar kind of becomes this one part of a translating team. And the other part of the translating team, this is where like all the unconventional warfare comes into it. He's like building every tribe he goes through, he enlists them. He's like, you hate the Aztecs too, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Like you don't like
Yeah.
them. And he finds this other native girl who was named Malinche, and she's become kind of like a heroine in Mexican national history. Like she's a kind of like their Sacagawea,
Okay.
if that
That
makes
makes
sense. So this other conquistador is like, well, this is like very 16th century. This other conquistador is like, I'm gonna make Malinche my wife. She's like, I think 15, 18, something like that. And Cortez is like, cool, cool. And then he finds out that she's like, for the time, I guess, like very attractive and very smart, and could speak the other native language that could communicate with Geronimo de Aguilar, so that he could use them as this kind of chain to communicate with the Aztecs. That
yeah.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
He kind
he's
of
like, he,
he found tools to basically infiltrate from within. Is that what you're
that's
saying?
it.
It
That's
was like
it.
espionage.
That's it. And then he tells this other guy, like, yeah, I know how like you're like planning to marry her, but like, I'm gonna marry her. And then
Yeah.
he's just like, yeah, he's like,
Fucking
yeah,
marry
but
this
like
bitch.
fuck you. And so they go up, they're in another like tribes village, I think in the Cholula tribes village. And these
Tallulah?
Aztecs, yeah, they're like a tribe called the Cholula in the Cholula area of Mexico.
Yeah.
And it's where they
Okay.
had all the big pyramids, like the big, like it was like a pilgrimage site. But the Aztecs would come take their like tribute from them like monthly, or I think monthly. And it would be like
So they were like mobsters basically in
just
currency with
crazy,
people. People were currency.
crazy. Yeah. And it
That
wasn't like
fucking
give us these people because we're gonna like go make them work in our fields. It was like we're gonna cut their hearts out in front of them and then read their entrails to see what gods are telling us. And so when the Spaniards found out about this, and they were like, wait a second, what are you talking about? They are on their way to this village. And you remember that scene in Predator where they all land in the helicopter? If you haven't seen Predator, this is the wrong podcast for you. It's the perfect
No, I've
movie.
definitely seen Predator.
No, not you. I mean, yeah, I mean everybody listening.
Oh yeah.
But it's a where these essentially kind of a like a tier 1 special operations unit goes into the jungle. That's kind of what these guys are doing, except they are basically private entities. They're like, it'd be like Blackwater doing it nowadays. Like they're not working as part of the Spanish army. So Cortez and about I think 600 of his guys, which have like crossbows and muskets, which are like the most badass thing you can have, right? But they're tramping through the jungle, and they've built up a little bit of a force, and they come across a bunch of like a pyramid of skulls and heads that had like flesh rotting off them on pikes, and then a bunch of like skinned kids' bodies, like little kids' bodies hung up in the trees and like skinned.
See, I always thought like pyramids of heads, like in video games and all that. I always thought that was just some cartoon shit.
Dude, this shit is wild.
No wonder
Super.
everyone claims that they're Aztec bloodline because
And so this is where you come into this like big clash of like everyone, even these other tribes around them were into making sacrifices and stuff, but they start going, wait a second, why are you guys doing this? Is this like from war? Because they could have at least understood that from their European standpoint, like a European Christian standpoint. They're like, well, shit happens, man. War sucks, but like, what happened here? And they're like, oh, we're sacrificing these people
or
for
right.
like to our gods. And they're like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah, to like our gods are like God of trees and God of rain and God of war. And they're just like, no, 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 no. They're like, no, fuck that bullshit. They're like, you no, I don't think so at
There's
all.
no more than the fucking one we
They're
know.
like, no, no, I don't think so at all. So they go to the next village and they're like pissed, and they see the Aztecs coming in to like
Nope.
get their, yeah, there's like, no, I don't think so. They see the Aztecs come, and these guys that are like, they have like nose pieces and like real fancy turquoise nose pieces. You've seen it like in Apocalypto where they have like the feathers and stuff, and they're holding flowers underneath their nose so they don't have to like smell the
Yeah.
the so this is another like really annoying kind of and I'm not like ardently pro conquistador. It's just like an annoying little like jab that all these kind of like wimpy YouTube channels take, where they're like, oh, they didn't want to smell the conquistadors. How come? It's like, no, they didn't want to smell all the skinless kids' bodies around them. You know what I mean? Like, and the heaping piles of like literal animal shit and rotting flesh everywhere. It wasn't
I
so
mean,
much just the Spanish in particular that stunk to them, like.
but like they thought the Spanish stung. Like conquistadors, they're those armored guys, right?
Right. So like the and they did wear their armor all the time. They did not smell pleasant. Like there's no doubt about
Oh,
that. But they
those
they
fucking
imply
sweaty balls in that armor.
they
I
imply
can
all the time
imagine.
though that like, oh well, it was this one particular time. It's like, no, they did that as a sign of, they constantly did that as a sign of their own nobility. Like that was a thing that nobles did, was walk around with a flower underneath their nostrils so they didn't have to smell. It was a stinky world back then.
Mhm.
Europeans are not, like things
They threw
didn't
shit in the streets.
it was,
You
yeah.
know?
I mean, like there, if you look at how many people the Aztecs alone are sacrificing, it's like 100 people a day. It's like thousands and thousands. So like, where are all these dead bodies going? Like all this gore and
Oh, a day.
viscera.
Yeah, they're just
Yeah,
piling. It's
yeah. It's
not like they're devoured
we
by the
just
gods.
really kind of underestimate the totality of all this. So, anyways,
Yeah.
they Cortez tells the chief of the tribe, listen, motherfucker, you're going to take the Aztecs hostage. And he's like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, do it or I'll fucking kill you. And he's like, oh, well, okay. So he does it. And then Cortez goes to his boys and he's like, let two of the Aztecs go and tell them that to like run back to their
Tell your friends about
yeah,
me.
go run back and tell your friends about me, right? Tell them I'm coming. Tell them like in Tombstone, he's like, you tell them I'm coming and hell's coming with me. But so they take off, and then the next day, he tells the Spaniards like, don't tell the chief that I did this. And so the next day, everyone wakes up, and he's like, hey everyone, your incompetent chief let two of the Aztec prisoners go, and they ran away. And now they're going to go tell the Aztecs and get you all killed. You can't trust this idiot chief anymore. You must follow me. And they're like, oh shit, like, yeah, we do, we got to fight. Like, oh shit, this is not good, like the Aztecs are going to be pissed and they're coming for us. So like, I guess we're with you now. So then they march through the jungle to Tenochtitlan, which is what basically what Mexico City is today. It's where Mexico City is. It is a city that the Aztecs basically built on a lake. It is a floating city. It's a flotilla. It's bigger than any
Yeah.
city Cortez and these guys have ever seen. It's bigger than any city in Europe. Maybe Constantinople is comparable, but like London, Paris, Madrid, it's not even close to
Yeah.
Tenochtitlan.
And they did that because they also like farm on water.
Yeah, they farmed on water. They
Yeah.
everything, and they had the city was surrounded by, I think it's 4 drawbridges. So this is where it gets real interesting. Cortez is like, okay, who's the main motherfucker here? And they're like, oh, it's this guy
Yeah.
named Montezuma. And he's like,
Who's
all
Big
right.
Daddy?
So they march across the bridge into Tenochtitlan, and they meet with Montezuma, who like has to kind of receive them as like visiting dignitaries. He doesn't want to just like attack them because they might be gods, right? He's not quite sure like what's
Oh,
going on here. He's pretty sure that he himself is a god, but he might like Cortez might be like this weird other god, because Montezuma had all these visions for years before this about like he knew that there were ships and stuff over there, but they didn't quite know. But they didn't know who these guys were, but he kept having like nightmares and visions about them like coming to kill all the Aztecs and take them all over and topple their empire. And so when, just to give you like an idea of what's like how big this is, when they cross the drawbridge and come into Tenochtitlan, so they have to go tell Montezuma, and Montezuma is in the basically like the reptile, this like the snake room of his personal zoo. Like his zoo had buffalo, snakes, crocodile, mountain lions, jaguars. Yeah, buffalo. Yeah.
hmm.
Cortez, that's the first written European count of a buffalo, is Cortez being like, well, he's got this weird fucking
Big
like
fucking
ox
furry.
thing, and like he's got him over here, and Montezuma's just like, yeah, buddy. Because I mean, like, this is just like, I don't know, finding Pablo Escobar or something. You just, or like
Mhm.
whatever, use a legitimate source, right? Like coming up on, or a quote unquote legitimate source, coming up on Bill Gates or whatever, like
Yeah.
somebody who's just wealthier than you've ever even thought about being. And he's like, well, like, do you guys have like a lot of gold? And they're like, yeah, like, we got a lot of gold. If we give you some gold, will you go away? And he's just like, yeah, I mean, no problem. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, give me a little gold, and like we'll be on our way. And so they give him enough gold to where he's like, holy shit, these people have a lot of gold. And then he like clamps handcuffs on Montezuma and he's like, listen, motherfucker, like
I want it
the
all.
fun and games are over. And they go into, so like he's holding them prisoner, and it's like months that they take over kind of this part of Tenochtitlan,
Yeah.
and they go and they're kind of like holding Cortez or holding Montezuma prisoner and negotiating with him and trying to see like what he'll give them and how much of the empire they can just kind of take through like rough diplomacy, right? And all the while, like Montezuma knows that his people are going like, why is our king being like such a pussy if he's a god? Like, why doesn't he just like throw these guys off, right? And
Mhm.
so Cortez, they have some more sacrifices, and Cortez is the guys see the conquistadors see the sacrifices go down, and they're just like, oh, so this is real. They're incensed. They're like, what are you doing again? They're like, well, we're sacrificing this to our god. So Cortez is like, okay, enough of this, and he marches to like the big temple they have, and he takes all this is like going into their Vatican. Like this is like
Yeah.
going into their like whatever, like their big, this is like way, it might even be more than that, right? Because like not everyone would say like, oh, the Vatican is like the head of everything, right? But it'd be like if every single American was like, oh, the Vatican is, or the White House or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's like that. And he goes in there, takes all the priests hostage, throws down all the statues, puts up a statue of Mary and a statue of Jesus and a big cross. And he's just like, none of you sons of bitches are touching any of this anymore. Like, and they're like, well, listen, what if we leave our statues up and put your statue up? But he's like, well, what about fuck you? Like, no. He's like, no, we're not doing any
No.
of this. And they like, okay, well, like, I guess we're not in a position to negotiate. So they end up like, again, this is the too long didn't read version of it. So all this is kind of like
Yeah.
convoluted in my
Hey,
head.
I did have a question. Up until those sacrifices, had Cortez and like the Spaniards in general, had they like had human sacrifice been a thing that they were aware of before then?
Not to this
Like, so this is
degree,
like the
not this
first.
like institutionalized degree, and especially no, not in any Western theater of warfare, not at all. Like that would have been not since like, gosh, man, like not even the Vikings really
Magnan
did
Man,
that.
you know?
Yeah, it would have been just a real kind of like, in the, I guess biblically it would be like a Canaanite thing, but they would have had like biblical reference for it. But like personally, they like even the most recent kind of warfare they were engaged in was largely against Islam, largely against like mostly Muslim forces, and like they they viewed them as like not in communion, not the same as them, right? But they didn't think that they were like mass scale conducting human sacrifices. When they saw this, they were like, what the actual
Yeah,
fuck
this
is going?
this has got to stop. Don't know
Yeah.
what it
and,
got to go.
and so like it's not, there's this, like I said, this real mix of like capitalism and theology here, because these guys are trying to get rich, but they're also like genuinely incensed that they are like sacrificing people for like what they consider satanic rituals, basically.
Oh,
They
so
no,
I
they
see what
literally
you
think
mean
it's,
controversially in the beginning, because I was just like, man, Cortez, he's always been a bad guy, and he like came and took over and raped, people and
yeah,
created Mexicans at,
right,
to that point,
right.
and that's what I'd always thought.
And
But I,
dude, the
I didn't
Cortez,
think of like the fact that he stopped them. He conscientiously stopped them from sacrificing people.
yeah, that was a
So
big
that's,
driving force once these guys found out about it. Now they still wanted to get rich, and I think it's important to like the big point of this whole episode, really, in the whole
yeah,
book, I think, is that it's kind of, it can be summed up in the quote that like great men with a capital G, like great men are almost always bad men. I think Churchill said that, but it's like if you go down in history as a capital G great man, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, like there's
hmm.
I mean, very few. They're almost all bad men. All like if you look from Attila the Hun to George Washington, right? Like George Washington had 7 affairs during the that they know of during the Revolutionary War. So like great leader, great tactician, or as far as like maybe more of a strategist, I guess. But
Everyone's got something in their closet.
they're not this squeaky clean. Yeah, I don't like don't.
Martin Luther King.
Sure, Martin Luther King. Yeah, yeah, lots of extramarital
Lincoln.
affairs.
Lincoln. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There's so you very rarely in this. It's a I think what I've seen a lot. Other than like kings and generals, I think we're big fans of kings and generals. They did a great job
Yeah.
like handling this. But you'll see a lot of just like Cortez was such a dick, and you're like, yeah, yeah, Cortez was definitely a dick, but like so is Montezuma's a psycho too. Like these people are insane. They're not.
Yeah.
They're like murdering thousands and thousands of people every year. They're pulling their hearts out of their chest and throwing them down giant pyramids, kids
Yeah.
included. And and the kids, they thought that the more the kids cried, it was for the rain gods that they sacrificed the kids. So they thought the more scared the kids were and the more they cried, the more rain there would be. So they taunt the kid and beat on him and slap him around and tell him like what was going to happen to him and then take him up to the top of a pyramid, and one priest would hold each limb. One priest would hold the left arm, one would hold the leg, one would hold the right arm, one would hold the other leg, and then one would hold the head back, and then the other would cut right underneath the rib cage, stick his hand up into the rib cavity, and pull out the heart while it's still beating, and then throw it onto this hot plate. And this person's like watching all this happen. You're still not completely dead. And then they watch your heart burn, and then the smoke as it goes up into the air is supposed to like give them different messages.
They're psych. They're
I mean, that's fucking
I
crazy.
Mean, I'm sure all they did was eat fucking fungus out in that jungle. You know?
Dude, it's like they're just fucking.
I mean, I equate things like that to like what Salem witch trials, you know, doing things, killing people for essentially some weird supernatural reason.
It's a very ancient thing. It's funny how it's been like around in so many cultures, this like notion of like the more suffering we impart, the more power we can extract from our sacrificial victim. That's a very like common theme, whether it's the Canaanites or some satanic ritual stuff that goes on today, or the Aztecs.
What is it, like blood of children or something like that?
Yeah, so when they see this, they're like, listen, man, like we showed up for gold, but like this is fucked up, right? Like they are really pissed. So they kill a bunch of they lock them while this festival's going on. They block all the gates off and they kill a bunch of the priests. Like they just murk a shit ton of people. And then they're like, uh-oh, maybe I think we just like murked a bunch of, it would be like, I'm trying to think of a better analogy, but it would be like in Moscow, they're like, oh, we just murdered the royal family. And like, oh shit, but what do we do now? They're like, oh fuck.
Oh yeah.
So they retreat farther into the city. They're like, they gotta like, they're kind of like holed up in the city. And now they're like, oh fuck. Like we're in like in Oh Brother Where Art Thou? He's like, we're in a tight spot when they get stuck in the barn. Like they're burning them out of the barn. He's like, we're in a tight spot. And so they're like, they've got in that temple was all the gold. The temple they took over, all the gold's in there. So basically, this boils down to one big last battle and kind of this like Mogadishu mile thing that they've got to do. So
what is that? What do you mean?
So we're going to do an episode soon on the Battle of Black Hawk Down, the Battle of Mogadishu. And at the end, if you watch the movie at the end, the guys that couldn't get picked up by the vehicles had to run that. It was about a mile from where they were to the stadium. So they called it the Mogadishu Mile. And the guy like,
you know, my lieutenant colonel from basic training was in that, and his name was listed in the credits right there as soon as they run back.
Well, my friend, wait until we get to the very next episode. We will have a treat for you. I assure you. We are going to be delving into that battle. A great book from there. I think it'll be very insightful on that. That's awesome, man. Like I didn't know that's a not. Then he experienced something not dissimilar from what these guys were gonna do. Right? Like this is fucking crazy. So they are in Mogadishu. They were stuck in this kind of a grid city, and they had to go street by street, and like they were holed up in this building, and they fought from the building first, right? If you've ever seen Black Hawk Down, they're holed up in this building, and they're having to fight from the building. So that's kind of what Cortez and his guys are doing. The Aztecs show up outside this building, and where they're holed up, there's Cortez and his force is like his people. Cortez's 600 guys are there's estimates from 5 to 10% of that means of the 600 guys were about 5 to 10% of Cortez's total force. The rest of it were other tribes that fucking hated the Aztecs.
Oh, so
90 to 95% of the people with Cortez were just other, well, not just, but like were other tribes that hated
yeah,
the fucking Aztecs.
that's nuts. And when so he and his 600 were inside the building, and then on the outside you have the Aztecs. But on the outside of them are these tribes that are coming.
No, so it's him and all of the what's left of that force, right? So
Yeah.
all of the indigenous people following him and his force are holed up inside the city, and
Oh shit.
they now have possession of a large amount of the gold and the king, the emperor of the city, but they're trapped inside the city. So it doesn't do you a whole lot of fucking good to have all
Yeah.
this gold. You don't have any Wi-Fi to tell anybody. It's like you're
It,
kind of stuck.
yeah, it's like a bank robber's like dilemma.
Exactly,
You have all the
exactly.
money, you're in the bank, and you can't get out.
And you are surrounded.
You're asking them to bring a car. They're saying they're going to bring a car, but they're not bringing a car.
So they have a battle with the Aztecs. The Aztecs are like just hammering them, and they're fighting back, and they in the midst of all this in this big really intense fight. They so there's two different versions of this, but I what they say in this book is that they told Montezuma, go tell them to like chill out and just let us leave, basically. Like let us leave. Let's fucking like let's talk. Let's construct an exit plan here. Let's
Yeah.
call some kind of a truce. And Montezuma's like, fuck you, man, I'm not doing that. They're gonna kill me. Because they're just
I'm
like
fucking
throwing
going
spears
down
and
with you.
rocks and shit. And he's like, no, fuck you. You're going up there. And so he has two of his soldiers like walk Montezuma up there with their shields in front of him. And he's like, okay, lift the shields up and then let him talk. So they lift the shields up. Montezuma steps out. Boom, 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 gets hammered with like fucking 100 rocks, right? It just goes down in a fucking heap and dies. And they're just like, they're just like, oh shit, that didn't work. And they drag him off. And all the
I
Aztecs are
wonder
like,
what they're like. Oh shit!
the Aztecs are just like, no, the Aztecs at this point were like, fuck you, Montezuma. Like, we hate you, dude. And like, so they threw all the rocks at him, killed him. He fucking drops dead. The Aztecs are just like, fuck you, man. And the conquistadors haul him back. So then they're like, okay, we're just gonna have to like make a break for it, right? The city is set up in a grid, and they're gonna have to go street by street. And then there's only the Aztecs have pulled up every other bridge except for one. And so there's only one bridge left to get out of the city. And everybody just like everyone's shown the gold, right? And even here, Cortez is like such a fucking like vassal or like a 16th century thing to do. He's like, well, we got to carry this 20% because this is for the king. So like that's we're bringing that in this like special case. And then I get another 20% because I'm Hernan Cortez. Thank you. And then and then like they divvy up the rest of it. So everyone basically has to decide like how much gold can I carry and still get out of here? But if I take too much, like I'll be weighed down. But if I don't take enough, I did all this for nothing.
that that is a dilemma. I mean,
So they basically are just like loading themselves up. They wait for nightfall, and Cortez and his girlfriend Malinche and all these like indigenous cohorts that are with him and his remaining conquistadors are all loaded up with gold, and he's just like fucking eastbound and down, dude. Like let's
Eastbound and down.
like let's just do it. And they're like, it's like it reminds me of like MacGruber. You ever seen that movie MacGruber?
Yeah.
The Saturday Night movie, and there's like, or Saturday Night Live movie, and they're like, well, "What's your plan?" He's like, "We're gonna go in there, and we're gonna see what happens." And they're like, "We're gonna wing it," and he's like, "What? No, we're gonna go out there, and we're gonna see what happens." And like that's kind of what Cortez does. So it's like, well, what are we gonna do? He's like, we're gonna fucking see what happens, you guys. Like we gotta fucking get out of here. So they all like start fighting their way. So as you're like, this is a major metropolitan city, multi-story buildings, right? And the
Yeah.
Aztecs are on top of the buildings throwing rocks and chucking spears, so shooting spears and throwing spears and shooting arrows, and just doing anything they can to harass them and kill them on their way out.
Yeah.
They make a mad dash. They lose like a bunch of people. They lose a bunch of people on the way out that are just like,
They have nothing covering them.
they have shields up. They're trying to like make a kind of a shield wall and stay underneath it, but they're still losing guys. Just like they're losing guys, they're losing horses, they've got a bunch of dogs with them, Irish wolfhounds and like
Wow.
Dobermans, I think. So they're like, you're just watching fucking arrows hit all this stuff and like fucking people and
Yeah.
everything going down.
It started off as one body moving forward, and then they
Right.
kind of every man for
People are just
himself.
getting picked off, and it starts like splintering. So then they get in the boats to get across the canal, and they're trying to cross the canal on the bridge, and guys are falling into the canal, and they're weighed down with all their armor and their gold, so they're drowning, like in Saving Private Ryan when they have all their gear on and they
Yeah.
fall off the landing gear, the landing ship, and so they're drowning there. A bunch of it spills out as they're trying to cross the canal. So like something like 80% of it or something, they lose all their gold. It falls to the bottom of the canal. Like they like lost a crazy percentage of it, but they um make it out. Like most of them make it out, and then they hightail it back basically to like the coast. Like they get away from Tenochtitlan. And then the Aztecs, meanwhile, are like, holy shit, we got rid of them. And like we like, you know, conquered this like evil invading force. They tried to like get all their gold out of the bottom of the canals. Like all these peasants, Aztec peasants, were like swimming to the canal and like trying to like
Mhm.
get their own small
Cover it.
fortune put together. So they're thinking, okay, this is great. Presumably, we don't know, I don't think, but presumably they had many sacrifices afterwards to
Yeah.
celebrate. Then what they didn't know, right? Like kind of what the real conqueror or the unfortunate, like the menace of the new world was smallpox. And one of Cortez's guys had smallpox and gave the Aztecs smallpox. So within about I think within a couple of years, maybe a decade, but definitely within, it could have been a decade, but I think it's within a couple of years. I think it's 40% of the Aztecs. I've seen estimates up to 90%, but I would say probably like the 40 to 80% of the Aztec population was dead from smallpox. Probably like 40 to 60. We're gonna be real realistic about it.
And it wasn't even intentional.
No. That's and they I believe it's chlamydia. It's chlamydia or gonorrhea that was in the New World and brought back to Europe, and just ravaged Europe. For
Wait, they had chlamydia?
Yeah, we didn't. It's chlamydia or gonorrhea. No, syphilis. I think it was syphilis, man. Something like that. There was an STD that
They
they
were
had.
able to live with it?
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like people before, yeah, like I think they kind of, there's a
They
real
had an
misunderstanding.
immunity to the
No,
like
they just
later
live with
symptoms
it.
or something.
No, it's like a lot of things like ringworm, even in uncontacted tribes today. Like you grew up wrestling, like we grew up
Yeah.
like it's a bane of wrestlers is ringworm. and
Yeah.
it's out of control. They don't have anything they can do about it other than like let it kind of work its way out.
Yeah, which that is the most pointless thing in the world is a ringworm.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up. But there's a major kind of misconception, and we're gonna do like I think I've got a fair amount of books like lined up on tribes because I like a lot of those. But the kind of notion that this is a good example of like native culture is a total misnomer and like borderline racist, really. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh, they're not like the Aztec and the Cholula hated each other. That's not the same culture. And like to say
Yeah,
that the
I mean it's
Aztec
tribalism in its whole. Like anything that's group usually hates another group.
and then like what did the
You know?
Aztecs have to do with the Inuit or the Shumash tribe? Fucking nothing. They didn't even know they existed, right? Like they didn't all worship the same gods or have the same culture. It's completely different. It's like saying Norway and Italy are the same. Like it's not even close, right?
Yeah.
But so Cortez is still a real son of a bitch, right? He's just a real son of a bitch. So he goes back to Cuba. Oh, during this, I forgot this whole thing. Oh my gosh. So part of it, his dudes after a while start going like, we've been out here for a long time. And this is before they get to Tenochtitlan. This is like one of the best parts. Um, they are like, we have been out here for a long time. And the governor from Cuba sends a guy who says, hey, dude, you need to come back to Cuba. And Cortez is like, fuck you, you're under arrest. And he fucking takes this guy like hostage. And then his dudes are just like, we want to go back to Cuba. We want to get out of here, dude. We just don't want to be here anymore. He's like, oh, you guys don't want to be here anymore? He's like, you want to get on those boats? You want to go home? They're like, yeah, we want to get on those boats. You want to go home? He's like, those boats over there? He's like, yeah, those boats over there. He's like, boom, I burned those fucking boats. He fucking lit them all on fire. He's like, you can't go home now. He's like, you fucking roll with me. He's like, I'm Hernan Cortez, motherfucker. You don't do anything without me. And they're just like, oh shit. They're like, I guess we do have to, you know what I mean? They're just like, I guess we're with you. So they get some more ships to come get them from Cuba. They go back to Cuba. Cortez ends up being like one of the wealthiest. He's like the prototype conquistador. Like he's the one that many people died trying to emulate because they kept thinking, I can get, if I go one more mile, if I do one more thing, I can get Hernan Cortez money, right? And he ends up going back and he marries he has a child with Malinche, but being the faithful
Oh, he had a wife back home?
Yeah, he got married afterwards, being the struggling faithful follower that he was.
As a child under wedlock.
Yeah, I hate the sin, not the sinner, man. You know,
just the bad Catholic.
Just
you know,
we're all working on it, I guess. But so this guy is like super rich, like gets married, has like this son, it kind of retires into wealth in Spain, but his reputation gets kind of sullied as this like kind of like maniac, like this kind of just
conqueror,
like, egotistical kind of,
rape, pillage, and plunger. That's what I was told in middle school, that
he's kind of
a fucking pirate.
So he kind of like fought off a lot of that, but it's like, no, he wasn't. It's too simple of a picture to paint to say like he was this. It's like Montezuma was a very powerful, influential, and in many ways skillful and insightful leader who
he was Jonestown, before Jonestown.
That's the thing. It's like, they always say, I hear in several of these like reviews of Montezuma and Tenochtitlan and the Aztec cultures, especially, they'll just like sweep this human sacrifice under the rug. They're like, well, yeah, I mean, they're like, people they underestimate that they build canals and they had bigger pyramids than they had in Egypt, which the Aztecs didn't build. The Aztecs didn't build those. The Aztecs swooped in on them, like a culture before the Aztecs built them, and then the Aztecs were like, nice pyramids, we'll use those. So, but they built the vast majority of this like Amazing. Like no, it's like the Roman Empire. Were the Roman emperors a bunch of dickheads? Yeah. Fuck
Yeah.
yeah, like absolutely. And he's like no, really no different. It's just as expansive, just as wealthy, sometimes even wealthier. Like this was a bigger empire than anything Europe had by far. Like it's not even close. These guys had never seen a
The
city that
Aztecs.
big. The Aztecs had a city way bigger. The conquistadors had never seen a city like Tenochtitlan. It'd be like if you'd never seen Tokyo or something. They'd never seen anything like that. Even coming from that's what they think. People think that like, oh, they discovered this little village in the jungle. It's like, no, this was a market that was bigger than this. Their market, like their main street, like farmers market kind of thing, was bigger
Mhm.
than anything in Europe. Not even like by a little bit, by a lot. It was
So they had like
way bigger.
hundreds of millions of people in one area.
They had millions of people. They had millions of people, at least a million people, which would dwarf any city, dwarf
And it's
London.
all one dude is leading that whole
One
fucking
dude, and
operation.
they don't think he's a king. They think he's God, and they think this whole empire. They think that everything that they've built, everything that they have, depends on the blood of sacrifice. And then this one dude came in and is like, "Hey, no, this is bullshit." And then chaos ensued, man.
I mean, I wonder how you start a whole like a their whole civilization believed that, And how did the first guy start that? He was like, well, you got to kill him for me.
Yeah,
you know,
so a quick
you know?
like origin story. The origin story of the Aztecs is from the Mexica. Like Mexico comes from a tribe called the Mexica. And the Mexica, if I kind of mix this up a little bit, forgive me, but it's basically like the Mexica were trying to get in good with what became the Aztecs. But the Aztecs were like, oh, cool, send us your daughter. And the chief is like, cool, yeah, I'll send you my daughter to like live with you guys. And they're like, yeah, yeah, live with us, cool, haha. And then the chief goes to visit, and this Aztec chief comes out of like the like dwelling that he's in wearing the skin of his daughter. And he's like, yo, bro, like, what gives? I mean, and
Like
then
my new jacket.
they had like a big war, and the Aztecs subjugated the Mexica and then built this big empire where like basically, yeah, they weren't conquering. So their style of warfare was different from Europeans too, because they weren't trying to kill people. They wanted people alive. Like if you see that in Apocalypto does a good job of that.
Yeah,
Like they're like hog tying people. They're not like spearing them to death. It's weird. It's a different paradigm, but it's because
it's
they were farming them. Yeah, they're like they saw it as like harvesting a crop, not like going to war. How creepy is that?
that they saw these people as just appliances.
As a crop, yeah, just like, well,
Yeah,
we need more. We need more human blood to make our empire run, and they don't mean that metaphorically. They mean literally. We need to open people up
that's
and like tear their
that's
hearts out.
fuel.
Yeah. So I
Jesus.
think it's important that like I think this was a good book in kind of illustrating that, like I said, great men are almost always bad men. So it wasn't just Cortez being the bad guy here. I think it was a good read because it was like it's fucking action packed. Like every time you think this motherfucker, you're just like, this guy is just a son of a bitch among son of a bitches. Like he just
Yeah,
doesn't. They're just like, yeah, well, it looks like it's over. He's like all like his other conquistadors are like, well, I guess we're all gonna die. And he's like, you pussies are gonna die. I'm not. And they're just like, well, there's not even any reason to think that, right? But uh,
so wait, do you know anything that happened like after that, like after Montezuma was killed and they made it out? What happened to the Aztecs? They
so
got you stated that they got smallpox,
sure.
but like how did their society move on from that? And did
So
they just dwindle away from smallpox alone?
well, they thought, okay, it's over, right? Like the Spanish were gone for years. They didn't come back. So like I think it was like 10 years where they were like, I guess like we did it, you know? And then when they were completely like they had basically this apocalypse hit them. I mean, 40,000, I mean 40 a 40% mortality rate is like COVID's got a 1% mortality rate, right? Like what's compare that? It's 40 times. 40 times is deadly. Is that right? Maybe 400. My math gets a little sketchy.
Yeah.
Either way, vastly.
I was right, 40 times, but
vastly more.
Yeah, and right now, COVID feels like a lot.
Right. So imagine, if you imagine, that between 40 and 60, you got a 1% of people will die from COVID. 40 to 60, maybe 80% of people died.
Yeah, that definitely would call for a shutdown.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But there were no mask mandates in Aztec in the Aztec Empire. So unfortunately, the Spanish came back years later, and all of it kind of just fell into disrepair, kind of like most empires do. If you look at like how Rome fell, and Rome didn't just fall in a day. Rome just kind of deteriorated over centuries, and that's kind of it deteriorated over decades in the Aztec case. And then it basically, this kind of, just like anything else, it's not, as again, it's a gray area where like there's this conquering force, but then the whether by coercion, by force, by desire, like the cultures inevitably meld together, right? The European forces and the indigenous forces, or the indigenous European culture and the indigenous culture, and thus you have, specifically in that case, Mexico today, right? Like that's what made Mexico. They fell into Spanish rule, and then eventually
see, that's what you hear, the Spanish rule.
Right. So it became a Spanish protectorate or colony, but part of the Spanish Empire, which, I mean, the vast majority of North America was for centuries. Yeah, the Spanish owned most of it. It happened, one of the fastest expansions of all time, but also it's this it's a very strange thing when you start to understand it more and more, that these guys were kind of like Blues Brothers-esque in what they were doing, in that like they thought they really believed they were on a mission from God too. Like they really believed that what they were doing was like
the right thing.
No doubt. So like whatever you think of it is one thing for sure, like whatever you think of that, but that's for sure what they thought. Like, no matter how crazy.
I think it's worth noting that they thought it's worth noting intent,
Yeah, they really believed
were to preserve life ultimately, but gold.
100%. Yeah, it's a tough thing for people to juggle, and it just speaks to kind of human nature in general. But it's a book that I think, I thought it was a pretty quick read. The guy didn't go too crazy into detail, so if you are so inclined, I would highly recommend it. It is it's called Conquistador, Hernan Cortez by Buddy Levy. So definitely be sure to check that out. So hopefully you enjoyed our first kind of inaugural episode here. We're going to be posting these on podcast platforms, like we're going to be on Spotify and iTunes and all that good stuff, and then we'll be on YouTube as well. And we're kind of just like developing this idea and having a good time with it. So hopefully you guys are digging it, and we'll be bringing you a bunch of different stuff. So some of the stuff that we've got lined up is all the way from like, we've got stuff about like the financial crisis in 2008, like how the mortgages collapsed, and the story about Washington Mutual, to Delta Force fighting in the mountains of Tora Bora.
Washington Mutual.
I
had an account with them, man.
WAMU, dude. Like it is the CEO is a fucking character, man. Just a real hoot of a guy. So yeah, we got lots of stuff coming up for you. Be sure and check us out. We'll be giving you like more details on more stuff as we get it posted. But if for anything I'm forgetting there.
No, I think pretty good combo.
Yeah, we'll be getting like social media and stuff rolling, but for now, just keep checking us out on YouTube, on Instagram. Oh yeah, and I have an email for the show. So if you have any ideas or questions, comments that you'd like to hit us with, email TLDR book club Too Long Didn't Read Book Club, TLDR Book Club at gmail.com. So anything you got to hit us with, and yeah, we'll be happy to hear from you. Till then, be sure and don't miss an episode. I don't know. We don't have a catchphrase yet. Just come back next time.
Good
I'm
night.
Brandon. This is Jeff, and we will see you
Jeff.
next time on the Too Long Didn't Read Book Club. Thanks for tuning in. Stop recording.